9.
9. Chris. Ooh, the design challenge we will be tackling today is pitch an underwater adventure that sounds workable. And why don't we take the word workable and make it more exciting sounding and say that sounds fun?
Okay. Sounds even better. Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rao.
And Andy, we have an exciting announcement for everybody. Roll for Topics is now a part of the podcasting juggernaut called Roll for It Media.
Oh.
Yeah.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit more about this, Chris.
Yeah, so we have created an organizational hierarchy for ourselves here, but there's a reason for it. Yeah, so we're nominally starting a podcasting network. That doesn't mean a whole lot kind of for you, the listener. But what it does mean is that our friends over at a new podcast called The Splat Book, we can work with each other a little bit easier under this umbrella. And working with each other basically means that we have a free license to sort of talk about each other and come on each other's podcasts and stuff like that. So The Splat Book is a podcast that is put out by John Corey, fan favorite John Corey, and Kyle Latino, who is I guess he's also a fan favorite, maybe a host favorite. He probably has. We should get him a good title, something like that. But they both have done on the podcast before, and so they started this new podcast that they're talking about also topics about role playing games, but looking at kind of genre specifically. I guess so genre, and then like a subtopic within that genre as well. So the one episode they have up right now is all about Middle Earth and using that as a canon setting. It's really good. It lets John and Kyle sort of nerd out about Lord of the Rings and Tolkien, which I absolutely adore. So we'll have a link to that podcast in our show notes. But you can also just find it, I think, at just thesplatbook.com. You can go get that, and then they have it set up so you can subscribe in whatever your podcast player. That is my big announcement. I think the part of the announcement that you should also be picking up on is if you've been thinking about creating a podcast and you're not sure what to do, how to get started, anything like that, reach out to us. We like talking about this sort of stuff, and maybe you can find a home on the Roll for It network, Roll for It Media Network. So, Andy, you said that you had a question for me before we got into our topic at hand.
Just a quick, it's a game-related topic, and it's been a little while since you and I have checked in on kind of the RPG tangentially related media that we've been consuming. What a terrible word, by the way, to describe, experiencing art.
Yeah.
But I have been on a Moorcock kick lately, and so I have been rereading a ton of Moorcock. I've reread book 1 of Quorum, book 1 of Hawkmoon, and I'm going through the first couple of Elric books again. Yeah. And just remembering why those are such special, occasionally frustrating, but just deeply rewarding books to read. And the question I have for you, and consider this maybe a mini game design challenge.
Ooh, okay.
Wasn't on our table.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious, how in an RPG might you model the fantasy literature trope of the doomed hero, somebody who has been fated by powers beyond him or herself to fulfill some sort of epic destiny, whether that's to be the savior of the age and defeat the big bad and bring about a beautiful utopian future, or in the case of Elric, where it's a grimmer doom and where he is actively fighting against the pull of that destiny throughout most of his life. And I'm wondering, do you see a place for that in a tabletop RPG? And how might you do that in a way that is actually fun at the table, especially for the other players at the table?
Yeah, I would have a long, extensive monologues about how dark and dreary life is being a really super cool hero with an awesome sword.
That's right.
Yeah. No, I think the approach that I would take is you do not get to play Elric as a player. I think you get to play his companions that show up.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Who's the companion? He's like the purple archer or something like that.
The red archer.
The red archer. Yes, that's what it is. Yeah. So I think you, the party gets to play as sort of like red archers, like that style of character. So you're following along with this guy, this person, right? Or you are otherwise helping them. And I think there has to be a sense of inevitability to what's about to come. So you might have to have a few twists and turns in there as far as how how the prophecy might get fulfilled at the end of the day, right? Because like, I mean, you know, if players have any sort of agency, they're probably going to work their hardest to sort of get around that.
Yeah.
I also don't think you can have that overstay its welcome too much, right? So I think you can't pick up like a 2-year long campaign at the start of it, and like you know that at the end there's going to be this great, you know, cataclysm that's happening, that's brought upon by your dark and brooding hero. I think it's got to be more like a single story. Like maybe you're dropped in like the story, I'm gonna forget it, it's in the second Elric book we were just talking about on the Discord, where Elric just sort of like shows up on this magical ship, and they all have to get together, you know, with everybody, with all the other Eternal champions that do, you know, fight this big battle. I think you start with something like that, so like the players are dropped into events that are already unfolding rather than before they've started.
I like it a lot. As I've been reading through these things, my mind keeps going to the Blades in the Dark style of like Devil's Bargain. Mm-hmm. And I feel like in the books, like Elric, for example, is sort of faced with these perpetual Devil's Bargains.
Oh, yeah.
Like
literal Devil's Bargains.
Yeah, literal devil. Like I'll get you out of this impossible situation, but now you've moved one step closer to your ultimate destiny. Mm-hmm. You know, the trick would be doing that at the tabletop in a way that is, you know, interesting and meaningful, and somehow manages to transcend just giving you a few bonuses to skill rolls, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's that, like, those bargains, are very much like this is your last favor you can ask of this god, right? Yeah. Those sorts of things, like these like gigantic promises that you're making that are very different from like you gotta +1 to killing orcs or something.
And there's you know, I feel like sometimes the price Elric pays, and I wonder if this would transition to a gaming environment, is, you know, the price is that at a future time Elric's choice will be taken from him in a different situation. Mm-hmm. So Elric accepts the aid in scene A and gets out of his impossible scrape. Then in scene B, a good while later, Elric is not able to resist Stormbringer, like, killing his closest companion and draining his soul. You know, something that Elric that in a game sense you might ordinarily fight against. Mm-hmm. I wonder if there's a way, you know, to say, hey, player, your character will get a boon in this scene, but the cost will be the next time something like this comes up, I, the GM, get to just dictate what happens. I'm trying to imagine if that would be fun or not.
Yeah, there's we're getting like so off track, but I really like this this kind of like combative nature between mechanics and story that you're setting up, right? So it's like you have a story beat that has some sort of mechanical change later on down the line. So like you've agreed to get out of this tough situation, but then later on, I, the GM, get to play my, you know, like my trap card. My trap card. I'm like, you like, maybe you have some of that agency taken away, or, you know, a story beat happens in a way that you were not expecting. I mean, going back to my original idea, I almost wonder if you pick up maybe after one of those devil's bargains has happened, and then you're the one who has to deal with the fallout in some fashion. You get dropped into it, and it's like, you know, Elric has made a terrible bargain with the, you know, like the water gods or something like that. And it's like the water gods have decided they're going to sink the castle of your kingdom to the bottom of the ocean. It's like, and that's going to happen no matter what, but then it's up to you to decide, who do we go down there to save? You know, like, you know, how do we swim down there? You know, like what, you know, what's the other fallout? Those sorts of things.
That's a good thought. I like the idea of stating up front that, hey, big consequence is going to happen and you can't stop it. Yeah. But there is actually a lot of playable game space inside the big consequence for you to maybe mitigate the badness of it, or just have fun and excitement in the midst of it, with the understanding that the big picture will just, you know, proceed as the GM dictates. Yeah. You know, it also makes me think, you know, we're talking as if the players kind of can't be trusted to make choices or kind of direct their character towards a preordained doom. And, you know, I think you and I both have that sense of, like, if you tell players that it has to be a certain way, you're going to invite friction and they're going to fight against it and try to work with it. You know, I think, though, that presented differently, you know, a lot of players would probably be on board with, like, playing the doomed anti-hero. Yeah. So anyway, I don't want to derail our entire episode just about that, but because I've been reading Moorcock, and because I know you've been reading Silmarillion, where the there's no shortage of doomed heroes.
Yes.
That might be an interesting one to touch on. So why don't we
Yeah.
transition to our actual rolled topic,
Yeah.
which is the challenge is here to pitch an underwater adventure that sounds workable. And I kind of admire the very low bar we've set for ourselves with the
Right.
description of that. Like
Yeah.
we didn't say we want an adventure that sounds exciting or thrilling. We just said it sounds workable. So
Yeah.
why don't we start with why this is even a challenge?
Mm-hmm.
So why did our greatest ambition for this topic, why was it that we come up with a workable idea?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been thinking about this since we rolled it, and I think it comes back to the idea that, you know, if you're going to be in an underwater space, you're giving up control of having like two-dimensional movement, if that makes sense. Right.
Yeah.
So like, yeah. So then all of a sudden, a lot of your tricks as the GM sort of go out the window. It's like, oh, like they can go up and down and left and right. Like they can go sort of wherever they want. And then I think there's also, for me at least, thinking about underwater, it seems very vast rather than constrained. So you're, you know, like this, I think the corollary would be, you know, like if it was on a land, it's like, you know, create an interesting adventure that's set in like a clear-cut plains, right? It's like, you know, like there's nothing to hide behind, you know. Like to me, thinking about this, my brain immediately goes to like, well, there has to be something under the water that's the interesting or workable part. There's something that's underneath the water. It's not necessarily the water itself. And maybe I am just lacking imagination right now. So you tell me.
Actually, this is fascinating because your brain went in the exact opposite direction than mine did.
Okay.
Faced with this challenge of an underwater adventure, you started to worry about the kind of the unrestricted freedom that it would give PCs. And you seem to be worrying that will stress the boundaries of like, you know, your gameable space. Whereas I went in the other direction. And when I think of underwater, I think of an environment whose unique properties only make the game less fun on a moment-to-moment basis. So by thinking, I mean, I think of the underwater sequence in like swimming in a video game, right? It's almost never fun.
Yeah.
Why is it never fun? Because you move slower. The controls are always like way clunkier and clumsier, right? You're always surrounded. Your enemies are like fish and sharks that do not suffer any of your movement penalties.
Yeah.
There's always, in video games, there's always some dumb timer of how long you can hold your breath. So you've got one eye on that. And it amounts to a lot of constraints. It takes away stuff from you, and it doesn't really give you, at least I'm overstating this a bit, but it doesn't give you much to compensate for like, hey, we've taken away your freedom of motion. We've taken away the agility with which that you've gotten used to using throughout this game. We've taken away your freedom from worrying about holding your breath.
Yes.
And it when I think underwater stuff in a tabletop RPG, I think that sort of thing. I mostly think, oh, great. You're going to have to apply a penalty to every attack you make. Your movement's probably going to be slowed, and you probably have to make extra rolls to avoid tripping or whatever. We've got to have some sort of breath timer going. I don't know what compelling thing you give to the PCs that makes it worth going through that. So that's my take. How do you respond to that?
So my response is, I think if we're treating this, this design challenge on face value, I think that the first thing we need to do is decide whether or not we want those to be challenges, or just to come up with like a quick story reason why they're not challenges, for the players. So for me, right, like the thought of trying to track like how much air you have, that stresses me the heck out. So I would want to throw that away immediately and just say like, oh, well, actually you're all like, underwater people, or like you just are fish, right? Like you're dolphins, like, kind of just like, you get to pick from, your class list is like, shark, dolphin, guppy, right? Like some of those sorts of things. So for me, like if we can start with that as our boundary, right? Like, so we don't have to worry about breathing. We don't really have to worry about like movement penalties. Then I think we can explore it a little bit differently. Does that sound okay to you, or do you want to keep something?
It does sound good, but here's the challenge I want to throw at that. If we imagine these design challenges as something that somebody could kind of take and incorporate into their game, I'm okay with coming up with some hand-wavy reasons that those irritating elements are not a factor. But let's come up with a couple of hand-wavy reasons that a party of roughly land-based adventurers, let's just come up with something hand-wavy to get rid of the irritating stuff we don't like.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got two thoughts real quick. So like one, I mean, the Adventure Zone Ether Sea is going on right now. So I just want to like make a nod towards that. Like I've listened to a few of those, maybe like the first 10 or 15 or so. I don't know if you listen to it at all, Andy.
I don't.
But, okay. So that's like a fully underwater adventure, right? So there's underwater cities and stuff like that. So probably what you should do is just hit stop on this and go listen to what Griffin and the McElroys are doing over at the Adventure Zone, because they probably nailed it in ways that we haven't. But coming back to, I think, our design challenge, the thought that occurred to me was in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, there's a task that's assigned to some of the characters where they have to go underwater to rescue someone. But there's a spell that's like, well, they all have to decide sort of like what spell they're going to use in order to allow themselves to go underwater. So one approach would be just like let the players decide. Another approach would be to like time limit it a bit. Like, so say like some wizard was able to cast some spell that allows you to breathe underwater, but it only lasts for 48 hours. You know, something like that. So then you make at least one of those challenges easier, but maybe you still keep some of that pressure of like what you do have to get out at some point. This is not just a perpetual thing.
I like that a lot. Yeah. Shall we say that, at the start of this scene or encounter or whatever it is that we're designing, the PCs have received some mechanism that lets them not have to worry about breathing and not have to worry about the like sluggishness or impaired movement. Is that fair? Or maybe do you think that takes away some of the stuff that makes the underwater environment actually interesting?
I think we keep the sluggish movement, or like the water-based movement from them.
All right, I'm definitely on board with that.
Okay, yeah, I think we try to design around the breathing problem, because that's as stated, like not as fun for us. Although there's probably clever ways you could take that away throughout the adventure for them, or like make them re-up it in some fashion. But I think the minute to minute, like you got to hold your breath. That's a bit much.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so then to me, the other part of underwater is sort of like this is a little bit of a cheat. But the transition between underwater and not underwater, right? So I think to make this adventure workable and interesting, I think you have ways in which you can move from those spaces back and forth. And maybe it's all like underground caverns that somehow water can't get to, or there's bubble cities, something like that. I think you need to have some of that. Otherwise, then it's just the water almost feels like too oppressive to me. Yeah, I think like if there's no way out of it in any fashion, it's like, well, then it feels like you're just applied sort of a physics layer on top of your game rather than.
Let me throw something out there. Let me just pitch something and see if it will work as a basis for this. So one thing that is appealing to me about underwater adventure is that it adds a third dimension to an encounter that you normally don't get to enjoy much unless you're getting really hardcore into flight and levitation spells. Part of me is like, what would like an underwater castle, like say if you had to infiltrate some underwater castle, even just to go in and get its treasure, if it were built by like underwater dwellers, how would you build a castle that makes sense in an underwater environment? And that sounds like a fascinating train of topic. But then I also think, what's fun is like interacting with an environment in circumstances that are different and weird. So there's something also fun to like interacting with like a regular boring old castle that's underwater. So now this whole new layer of 3 dimensions is added onto an environment that otherwise would be pretty rote and boring. Does one of those sound more fun?
Well, maybe both. I think your adventure would probably have both. My gut is telling me the castle sounds a little bit more fun to design on air, but maybe the city would be too. Yeah, but let's go with the castle, because I think the first thought that I had with the castle. So if you were to transport, like going back to the Elric thing that I mentioned. So if you had a castle, like a land-based castle that sank into the ocean and settled down on the floor of the ocean or something that you were going down to, there'd be a couple things that happen, right? Like obviously, like it would crack. Parts of it would kind of crack and break away if it falls under there. It might not land. It's not going to land exactly on its foundation as it was up above, so things are going to happen there. But then if it's underwater for any amount of time, like erosion is just going to happen. You know, the castle is not going to be in pristine condition, I think. So that's sort of like, you know, number one, if it's down there for longer than, you know, a couple years, you're going to have everything kind of torn away. But then I think that gives you some opportunities to do some fun stuff with like magical stuff. So like say there's a magical tapestry in one of the rooms or the hallways or something like that is completely not disintegrated, right? It's not frayed. It looks, you know, brand new, even underwater. Right. I think you can point out, you can almost like, you can ratchet up the contrast between elements inside of the castle. That way, I think in a little bit of an easier way than you might if it's just on the land.
So at some point in a while ago, a castle or a small castle, a small fortress sank under the ocean. It's been down there long enough to get like, you know, partially covered by silt and sand from the ocean floor, and for that cool erosion to have set in, and for sea creatures to have moved in and made it their home. So your party needs to go down there for some reason. There's the obvious, you've already mentioned a couple of go-to standards. You know, there's a thing down there you need to retrieve. So what might we have to get out of there? And yeah, let's hear it.
Okay. The entire castle.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So Andy, the castle was in the sky. So it was a castle in the clouds somewhere. For some reason, the magic failed. This thing dropped out of the sky, you know, hit the ocean and is sunk down to the bottom. And you have been tasked to get the castle out of the water.
Oh, that is fantastic. That's so much better than the like, yeah, there's a magic sword down there.
Yeah.
You have to retrieve. Okay. Yeah. That is wonderful. So let's try to nail down some details. So just real briefly, why did the castle fall out of the sky?
Why did the castle fall out of the sky? Do you like the idea that there was some sort of like devil's bargain made by someone else? I mean, I know that was just a throwaway idea, but I'm kind of...
I am all for incorporating our throwaway intro conversation into the adventure pitch.
Yeah, okay. So let's say, was it the king, or was it some other party in the kingdom that made this terrible bargain?
I like the idea that somebody else made the terrible bargain.
Okay. And so maybe the king's the one who's tasking you with getting the castle back. Who would plausibly be able to create such a bargain that would result in this?
So what if somebody in the royal family, like a bitter child of the king or something like that, who technically has the, you know, a right to the castle in a way that would make like quote legal sense, has bargained it away in exchange for has frittered it away in some sort of ill-advised deal with a power or a sorcerer or a spirit or something.
Yeah, what would be like maybe the water god and the sky god have been fighting, something like that, and like this was a way for the water god to sort of get back at the sky god. So you have sort of this like cosmic battle. The water god offered something to the child. I don't know. Like maybe the child always wanted to go fishing or something like that. You know, like so they've been fishing off of the clouds, and like the child always wanted to catch a shark, and it's like, well, I'll let you catch the biggest shark ever if you just if you just go down to the sub basement and flip the giant switch from on to off on the magic.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to get too deep into the backstory here, but I love the idea of somebody, you know, a young impetuous person who was like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like not thinking through the terms of the deal very well. I really, really need to catch this biggest shark to impress the princess or something like that. So yes, sure, whatever. You can claim one dwelling place from our kingdom. You know, sea lord.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so then the sea gods or something like that pulled the castle out of the sky, into the ocean. So. What's the situation down there right now?
Maybe just for fun, like let's say when it hit, it like cracked the castle in half. Okay. So like you almost have like these two halves, and then as they sank, they came apart, you know, as they settled, right? So then you can have, I think, then you kind of create two spaces to play with in there. And like maybe they fall, and like in between them is the city that we mentioned briefly. Yeah. Right. So you almost like you have like, you know, a mile off one way is one half of the castle, the city in the center, and then a mile the other way is the other half.
That's perfect. Yep. That makes total sense.
So probably there was people inside of the castle that came down.
Oh, for sure.
Came down with it. So, I mean, I think then you can have survivors. You can have people that didn't make it. I guess what are some fun ways that people could have survived down there? Survived, like maybe did they make quick bargains with the water god?
Yeah, so I think there would be a few knowledgeable people, maybe a couple of, like the king's wizard might have the wherewithal to do this, but also, some magic using locals or something like that might be able to make cut a quick bargain with the water god to survive. There's always these sort of horrible, I guess they're probably quasi-urban legends about like in shipwrecks where people wind up in air bubbles down there.
Yeah.
And like they live for like 40 days and then on day 41 the rescuers show up or something.
Yeah.
So that can't get people through years and years of living. But I wonder if in some sort of fantasy-ish way there is like a community of surface dwellers down there in some sort of artificially maintained air bubble. And they've adapted. This is their world now. They're not really trying to escape anymore because they've judged it futile. So there is a little community of like just regular old people down there. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, some sort of bubble, and like maybe they're like frantically, by the time you arrive, so they've been down there long enough that food stores are running out. Like, so I don't know, like right, maybe they quickly had the wherewithal to run down to like wherever the food storage was in the kitchen, like that, and create this initial bubble, right? And then they're trying to expand it more and more as they can, because they've done the math, they can't make it to the top like that. So you have this bubble of survivors down there. They're like at each other's throats because it's year 2, 2 or 3, like that. They probably found ways to like sneak out for a little bit, so maybe they can hold their breath for minutes at a time, but they they can run out to get some fish or something and come back into the bubble. So I think that'd be a fun thing. I mean, you could also have like the king and his wizard could have also done that as well. So maybe there's like these 2 pockets of people that are in the same castle, but they just haven't known that they've been there.
That creates the possibility for like conflict between those 2 factions that the PCs could possibly get pulled into. And let's make sure that the PCs must interact with or get help from at least one of these little communities in order to accomplish their goal. Yeah,
they like, if there is some sort of easy magic to get it back up, or there's, someone who knows like what the original deep dark magic was that got that put the castle in the sky for the first time.
What do the PCs have to do to get the castle back up there? And let me throw out a little background suggestion. What if the Sea King, he loved his castle for like a year, but because he's fickle and borne about by currents of emotion and desire, he has already forgotten the cool castle that he liked, and so he has moved on. So the castle can be retrieved. The sea god is not going to. You don't have to kill the sea god to get it back out.
Yeah.
So what's the mechanism? Is it like a mechanical device? Is there like a literal engine down there that you need to restart? Is it magic? Is the castle being held down by magic that counteracts its like normal floating magic? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, thinking about the mechanism by which it's down there or else how it gets get back up. I think you give your players a few options for how it comes out and leave yourself open to suggestion for other stuff. So I mean, I think the ideas that come to my mind is like, maybe there is some sort of magical means that gets it up there. Maybe like the original way it got up there was magical, but then they found a mechanical means to keep it up, after a couple decades like that, because the wizards were getting tired trying to keep the spell going.
It's like a backup system. Maybe they anticipated they couldn't keep the magic going forever, so they did some sort of backup system. Okay, go on.
There should also be a bargain for the players to like go back on whoever gave them this quest and like for the water god to just keep it down there. Right. Yep. Too like hey, instead of that, what if you do this, and this great thing will happen. But then maybe you have that city, like the city that's already down there of merfolk or whoever it is, maybe they want it, right? They want to keep it down here because they like it. They've started to move in, they've gotten lots of fun stuff from this thing. Like, why would you try to take this away from them? Like this great gift that the water god gave to us, like, it's not yours. Why do you try to take it?
Yeah. This is a situation where like we trust you as the GM to like fill in the details here. Is it merfolk? Is it crab people? Is it whatever? What are the dangers? Stuff like that. But Like, so what if we have this underwater environment that consists of two halves of a castle and an underwater settlement of some sort? You can decide the exact you, the GM, can decide the exact details of what's going on in those places. But we have a couple of factions. We have one faction is the underwater society that is down there that lays claim to the castle because it fell on their city. It's theirs, right?
Yeah.
And then you have two separate survivor communities holed up in one or both of the castle pieces. And it would be great if those two communities didn't like each other or were working at cross purposes. Maybe one wants to stay down here and adapt to underwater life or whatever and make some arrangement with the local underwater, with the merfolk. And maybe the other is just hell-bent on getting back up into the sky. So that's 3 factions for your PCs to bump into. And I think that's plenty of factions, right?
I think, 3 factions plus, various demigods as well.
Yeah, exactly. And then in the background, you have the supernatural background radiation of this situation. So, Chris, what if we wrapped it up by throwing out, and let's be quick on this, what are 3 encounters that could really only happen in an underwater castle that GMs could pepper into the adventure or use as inspiration?
I'm thinking of like a whale, honestly, like, some sort of large underwater creature that you would not be able to attack really, like comes by and just takes a bite out of like an entire room, entire room of the castle, like while they're down there, or like tries to ram into it in some way. Yeah. So you have a threat down there that it's too gargantuan for your players to really do anything about. So they just need to find a way to survive.
I like that. And you know what, as I think about like underwater movies and stuff, that is kind of a feature of the genre, right? So some sort of mammoth creature that's almost just an environmental reality rather than like a monster you would fight. So a whale or a giant squid or something like that. Yeah. I don't know. And it periodically, I don't know, it if it's annoyed by the pieces or something, maybe it just periodically like smashes a section of the castle to get at the PCs or something like that in a way that it's not really intended to hurt the PCs, but to like shake up the environment. Okay, so that's a good one.
You got one?
I'm kind of intrigued by the idea that like, the bottom floor of the castle would have lots of like silt and sand built up on it. So I don't know, I'm just wondering, it doesn't sound very fun to say you have to dig down into the sand to get at what you want, but but that would be a real challenge. I don't know. Any thoughts?
Oh no, I like that a lot, right? Because if so if it's picked up a bunch of extra mass while it's down there, like the mechanical stuff isn't going to work until you deal with that. I think that's like a nice like, hey, players, just be clever. How are you going to clear this out? It's like right, because that's not an insurmountable task, but it's also something you have to think about. If you're going to raise this thing up.
So then, for our last bit, Chris, what's like the scariest type of underwater like nightmare fuel that you've seen photos of or something like that can be lurking somewhere in the castle?
When I was littler, like, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 or something like this, I was at a water park one time, and they had these like lily pad structures. They were probably like maybe 10 feet across or so, like that you could walk across to get across like, part of the pool. So it was like super cool, super fun. And it wasn't a super strong swimmer at the time, so like I'd fallen off and actually went under one, and I wasn't sure how to get back out from it. And I just like, I still have this moment of panic when I think about the like not being able to breathe and also not being sure like which way is up and how to get out from under trap. So I think like, if you're underwater, you have to have at least one of those sequences where you have to swim through a cavern that is like the size of you. You have to go underwater, kind of swim through it to get out to another area in order to get out, and it's got to be pitch black, right? So it's just like all this stuff is working against you. Yeah, so I think you need to find a way to remove the you can just breathe underwater portion of this adventure that we've talked about like a couple of times in there strategically.
Yeah, like if you're playing a system that allows for consequences to happen as a result of die rolls, it seems like an obvious one. Like you lost your breathing apparatus, for a turn or two. So I was thinking, one thing that has always kind of freaked me out is like I find jellyfish kind of creepy. Yeah, I mean individual jellyfish are cool and cute and stuff, but the idea of like drifting into like a forest of these floating jellyfish and being kind of having limited ability to get out, getting entangled in them, or maybe even something more mundane like just getting entangled in kelp or seaweed, is like is creepy to me. And those seem like good sorts of natural obstacles or threats that you could just pepper around the environment while anything else is going on.
Yeah.
Like if there's a few drifting clumps of like kelp that you could get caught up in, and especially if your system can evoke sort of that panic, like if you've ever brushed up against like seaweed while you're swimming in the ocean stuff, I mean, there's this sort of visceral revulsion and panic that you feel that's out of proportion to any actual threat you're experiencing.
Oh, totally.
So I don't know, maybe look at your game mechanics and see like how can, and this would work also for your, keeping your head straight while when you're disoriented in a dark underwater place. So
anyway. That's good. Okay, so just one kind of like last thought that I have for you is like, what is something that is like super magical that they could find down there that's unrelated to the adventure as planned?
Well, my first thought is something that, how do you get rid of something? You chuck it into the ocean. So what, you take it way out in the ocean, you chuck it in. What would someone in the past have wanted so badly to keep away from everybody else? They wanted it to go away forever. So they chartered a boat and sailed out and they dropped it. Like, what would that have been? I mean, we've talked about Tolkien and stuff, I don't remember if it's actually suggested as an option in the Tolkien books, but when they're trying to figure out what to do with the ring, for example, there's that sense of like, well, could we bury it? Could we drop it in the ocean or something? So I'm not saying it needs to be the ring of power that PCs find, but I don't know what might be dropped deliberately into the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, I think something along those lines, or you could have, maybe there's some sort of artifact of that kingdom, the Sky Kingdom, that was dropped down there by some sort of rival, right? Like they captured a town somewhere and they dropped like the great grandfather's body, or like a statue of him, like a statue made out of like some sort of magical metal like that will not fade, right? It's just sort of in the middle of the area down there. Heck, like maybe like that city of underwater people, like they have it in their town square and like it's revered for some reason, right? And then it's like, oh, now the castle's down here too. Great, this is ours.
And I kind of like the idea that they revere this object maybe without knowing what its significance is to the surface people that created it. So okay. Maybe it's the throne and somebody's using it as a chair in the the underwater courthouse or whatever. But okay. Well, let your imagination run wild, GMs. So, Chris, I think we ought to wrap it up there for time purposes.
Well, Andy, we did it. We did it again. We brainstormed our way to an idea that I actually want to run. So I think that's a success.
I know. That's the question I always want to ask at the end of these. Okay, did we create something that you would actually want to run? And for me, the answer is yes. Like I now want to go out and think more deeply about these things. So anyway, hopefully we've inspired a little bit of that in you too, dear listener.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, as always, if you have any feedback, please let us know. Please share the podcast with your friends. Make sure to check out the Splatbook podcast as well at thesplatbook.com. But yeah, I think that's it. We will be back in a few weeks with even more great ideas about role-playing games. They're good ideas, I would say. Maybe not great.
No, Chris, I mean, they are great. They're the best of ideas.
Oh, they're best. There's no.
We are now a podcast media empire. We can't none of the self-deprecating stuff anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's it for it now. Then I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.